are creating we're creating an FAQ on the website for people to be able to ask questions. So we'll get your question answered on the FAQ. And just know if you have a question, there are probably a lot of other folks that do. So don't be shy and just know that if we can't get to your question today, we will try to get those answers up on the website. Um, okay, that is our housekeeping and sort of level setting for today. I am not going to take up too much more time except to say please go to floridatrib.org. If you're not already signed up for email updates, make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter. We have a special elections newsletter that's running every Tuesday between now and the end of November. And also tell your friends. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our amazing journalists to dig into the meat of your questions. So our moderator for today is Nate Monroe. He's the executive editor of the Florida Trib, longtime Florida journalist, and somebody who has covered probably most, if not all, of these different races and candidates over time. We have Kate Payne. She is a reporter covering state government in Tallahassee. Kate has a lot of experience in Florida journalism as well. She's worked everywhere from Miami all the way up to Tallahassee and was covering the legislature before coming to the Trib. So we're super lucky to have her. And last but certainly not least, we have Trinity Webster-Bass. Trinity is our K-12 education reporter. She is based in Jacksonville, but covers education statewide. And she actually started with us as a reporting fellow and really, really excited to have her getting on the ground and covering issues related to public education. There could not be a hotter topic in our state right now. So Nate and Kate and Trinity, I'm going to hand it over to you. Once you all have had some time to sort of set the stage and talk about some of those questions, we will bring folks from the audience in with you to join your panel for a few minutes.
All right. Thank you, Deirdre. I do want to thank everybody for taking some time with us this evening. These are, primaries get slept on, but these are important elections. As Deirdre said, some of these school board races are going to be decided in just a couple of weeks. And so, we're really happy to bring this election preview to you guys, and hopefully we touch on some insight that's helpful and informative for you. I'm going to start with Trinity. Something that you and I have talked about in the last several weeks, especially as Deirdre mentioned, we are part of a reporting partnership across the state to make sure that every school board race in the state gets covered by a journalist. And so I've been editing a lot of school board stories and reading a lot of school board race stories. And it is absolutely striking to me in race after race in counties large and small, urban and rural. One issue that crops up again and again and is a driving is a kind of driving priority in all of these races is declining student enrollment in the public education system. Trinity, why don't you talk a little bit about that? What's going on here?
Yeah, so there are multiple factors to point to the fact that both large and small, mid-sized, all of them, public school districts are really losing students at an alarming rate. One factor is the fact that, of course, across the state, but also nationwide, we're experiencing a low birth rate. So that means less kids in schools, obviously. Another reason for that that's particular to Florida is the fact that school choice was expanded through the Universal Voucher Program, and that bill was HB1 passed in 2023. And unlike other states, we've seen such an exponential growth of people, of families who are opting into the voucher system. So that's another factor. And then on top of that, something that's continuously been affecting Florida is the fact that ICE raids are also occurring, especially across South Florida. And some families are scared to even send their kids to school. So for all of those different combination of reasons, it kind of creates this perfect storm for why public school districts are losing students.
One interesting observation, again, that you and I have talked a little bit about, and I'm going to have you unpack this. For those of us who were in the reporting storm, particularly during and just after the pandemic, school board races really turned on, I mean, really just became proxies for culture war issues, became proxies
Yes.
for national politics. And I actually feel like what we're seeing in this cycle is kind of a return to more kind of meat and potatoes education issues, just like you talked about, school closures, declining student enrollment. What's going on there? I know these are nonpartisan races, but you've done some good journalism lately about some of the politics behind these school board races and what may have actually changed since the immediate post-pandemic years.
Yeah, a subtle plug. So I just did a story on Moms for Liberty and their declining influence in their home state, which is the state of Florida. Moms for Liberty got their start in Brevard County, and their second chapter was established in Indian River County. And what they did was really take school boards by storm, and they were taking up all these issues, cultural issues, anything from book bans to the issue of gender neutral bathrooms and transgender children who wanted to participate in school sports. All of those issues were coming into play. And I think that's because during the pandemic, parents were really seeing an up close look at what their child's education was. And parents really hadn't experienced that before. And I think also with the fact that Florida is a place of conservative politics, we know, it just created this fertile ground for Moms for Liberty and those who share those views to really take off and those ideas to proliferate. And one way they also did that is through the endorsement of school board candidates throughout 2022, which was the height of the organization. But shortly after that, coming out of the pandemic, a lot of those previous held views were shifting because of, again, we saw school choice expanded, and public schools again had to reckon with the fact that we are losing students at an alarming rate. Parents have more choice, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, of course, but it does have a direct impact on public schools. And yeah, public schools had to do something about that. So now that we're kind of out of this cultural era, out of the pandemic, public schools are really having to deal with the siphoning of money from the same pot that they get their public dollars from. That's going directly into school voucher scholarships. So budgeting is really a big issue. Going back to the basics, like you said, things like budgeting, things like school closures are really big right now because a lot of school districts are having to close schools because they can't afford to keep them open. And because students equals dollars for public schools, that's another reason why we're seeing school closures as well. And I also say like another huge issue is teacher retention across the state. We're seeing a lot of teachers who are, maybe disillusioned with the job. The pay isn't the same. Florida has not one of the greatest salaries across the state for teachers compared to other states. So there's also that too of just really getting back to what does it look like to be fiscally responsible within a public school district?
It almost seems like in some of these districts, there are still certainly plenty of school board candidates, incumbents, and people running for open seats that would be happy to wage culture wars, but it's almost like the budgetary situation in a lot of these school districts does not provide that luxury. Like this is kind of a rubber meets the road moment for public education in Florida, and that's just been an interesting change to see, and um, yeah. So one thing I'll say, just as a as a Jacksonville resident, and of course you're a Duval County native, one part of this Moms for Liberty story that is a little bit intriguing to me is that Duval County is not really thought of as the kind of epicenter of like the Moms for Liberty movement. I think people tend to associate maybe Southwest Florida with being more the kind of closer to the center of gravity of that
Yeah.
kind of politics, and yet Moms for Liberty kind of slyly ended up having establishing a very strong foothold on the Duval County School Board. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so between the 2022 and 2024 elections, Moms for Liberty backed five candidates that included Melody Bolduc, Charlotte Joyce, April Carney, Reggie Blount, Tony Ricardo. Yeah, that's all five of them. So out of the seven school board members on our board, we had five members who were backed by Moms for Liberty, either through just a public endorsement or financially as well. So that really, by 2024, Moms for Liberty held a majority. But now that we have three seats opening up in districts 2, 4, and 6, there is the possibility of the political makeup of the Duval County School Board to shift to something maybe a little bit more neutral, maybe a little bit more left, who knows? Time will only tell. But yeah, there is the opportunity for a political shift. And I also suspect that we would probably see that across the state as well.
So this is a good time to pivot to Kate, who, in addition to being a just a crack state house reporter for us in the AP, you're also an education reporter in your former life as well.
Hmm.
Um, so we just published a story that you wrote about Byron Donalds, and I want to get to that in a minute. Um, one thing, the Republican side of the gubernatorial race thus far, the Republican primary, has been very online brained, um, and has been about a lot of things. And I think that lost in the shuffle a bit is that the front runner, the person who is likeliest to win based on what we know here and now,
Hmm.
um, very much would put front and center on his agenda education reform, school choice, all these things that we're talking about. He would, I think, turbocharge Florida's school choice movement, or at least that would be his intentions. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for folks who maybe aren't as familiar with Byron Donald's history, and the history of his wife, Erica Donalds, the both of them really made their names as school choice advocates going back a decade. So Erica Donalds actually was elected to public office first to the Collier County School Board. And really, ever since then, they have been a kind of dynamic duo in Florida education politics, working their way up. And so Congressman Donalds really made a name for himself when he was in the state legislature working on these school choice issues, really laying the groundwork that even now, years down the road, we're seeing these laws even expanded and built upon that he put in place years ago, to open the door wider to things like charter schools now being able to open inside of traditional public schools, and those public schools having to pay for the costs of, you know, the charter schools using their classrooms, using their cafeterias, school security. So Byron Donalds really was working hard to lay that groundwork. At the same time, his wife, Erica Donalds, became an advocate and an education entrepreneur in her own right. And really, is working on these things from the business side through her own nonprofit foundation and also for-profit companies, starting her own charter schools, starting a virtual reality school. So really sort of pushing this movement forward at the same time that he's creating this regulatory space. And I think absolutely we can expect that the both of them together will continue to push this movement even further than we've already seen, where Florida is for a long time has been, sort of the cutting edge of the conservative reimagination of education. Now, culminating with this universal school voucher program that I think we can expect to see even more should he be elected in November.
I know that something that we've had discussions about in the Florida Trib newsroom many times is that this belief we have that education is kind of the great untold or kind of undertold story of the DeSantis era in Florida. And it's almost kind of hard to imagine that we could very well be walking into another 8 years of very profound change in public education and how our students are being educated.
Mhm.
Um, why why is this kind of getting lost in the sauce? Like why talk about this uh, my words, weird primary on the Republican side.
Yeah. So I guess,
Small
to
question, I know.
yeah. Well, and just I guess to reiterate for folks, Byron Donalds has the endorsement of President Donald Trump. He is up, like 40% on average in polls, far and away, is the lead. But we have seen these other candidates, pulling much further behind, but really trying to stake their own claim and, keep this make a competitive run for it, which voters appreciate. Some voters really want to see that. Um, and I think as far as the like online-ness of this campaign really goes to this investor, James Fishback, who really came out of nowhere, has not held elected office before, and has absolutely tapped into this sort of online culture, especially among young men, really sort of winking at um, racists online, anti-Semites online, and really appealing to a kind of nativist, old Florida idea of, who should be in an elected office. Um, I think, if the polling bears out again with that enormous lead that Byron Donalds is showing, I don't think that James Fishback can make up that ground at this point. But I think to the extent that he is resonating with young voters, young men especially, that is absolutely something to be looking at in our politics going forward, not just in Florida, but he's resonating with people across the country. So it's absolutely something to watch.
He has certainly done a very good job generating attention,
Hmm.
generating a lot of heat and light around a campaign that
Yes.
it seems to me we have no objective reason to think that he is a front runner, or even close to a front runner, um, but has nonetheless felt like, at least in the online discourse, for whatever it's worth, has had a very an outsized place.
Hmm.
Um, Really quick, and we'll pivot away from this after this, but I do. What is going on with Jay Collins? Like, why can't DeSantis as lieutenant governor? There, it's always. I mean, it's felt like there's just been a kind of failure to launch, sort of even before his campaign started. What's going
Yeah.
on there? Why does he seem to have fallen so flat in this campaign?
Yeah. And it really has gone back since before he launched. It was sort of this long build up, when's it going to be? And it sort of kept getting pushed back. And I remember when he finally did launch his campaign, and it was, at this press conference in the Florida state capitol, and we all went down. And even in that moment, like already it just felt like, what are we doing here? Like the candidacy was just not, yeah, never really got its wings. I think part of it is the governor, Ron DeSantis, is known for keeping a very close circle, for not really being comfortable with the kind of like glad handing and small talk and like those small graces that sort of keep the wheels of politics running. And even with, this lieutenant governor that he picked, that he appointed to fill a vacancy, um, there just is this friction, that it seems like Collins was never really able to bridge that gap. And so I think that for one, I mean, it's it's really been a sort of cold shoulder for Collins and what could have been, you know, a leg up directly to launch this run, but it's yeah, it's just never really taken off.
Okay, well, we'll come back to Kate in a few minutes. I want to go back to Trinity about something. You have talked to some superintendents in different parts of the state, and you get to have, I think, an interesting and unique kind of broad view of education in Florida from a kind of statewide lens. We just talked about, Byron Donalds, his kind of raison d'etre is education reform, school choice. I'm This is also part of a kind of 30-year long story in Florida. Give us a sense of when we get a new governor, whoever it is, what is the state of the public education system that they are going to inherit?
Yeah, that's a pretty loaded question. I'll actually go back a little bit in history and also to kind of touch upon Jimmy's question. So school vouchers were actually came out under former Governor Jeb Bush's administration as a way to kind of give students who have disabilities, students who come from a low socioeconomic status, to kind of give them a leg up or just different options, different educational options. But throughout the decades, and that legislation came out around 1999, the Florida legislature would kind of raise the bar of how many people would be able to receive those vouchers to the point where in 2021 or so, about the kind of boundary for folks who could participate in the voucher system was about 400% of the federally allocated poverty line. So obviously, 400% times, that is a large number of people who can actually opt into the voucher program. So originally, it started off as something that was supposed to be intended to be beneficial, but as vouchers have become more prevalent, people who have already been able to afford partaking in the voucher system are continuing to do so with the universal voucher program. And that is really the main problem here of public schools also having, I'm sorry if it's a little bit loud if there's a little commotion, but um that's really the crux of this whole issue of the public dollars being used for the voucher program, and it comes out of the same pot that is supposed to go to public schools. And to get back to your question of what state does that leave public schools, and it kind of leaves many public school districts in this kind of circling the drain momentum of like, we're trying to do the best that we can, trying to do all these methods to promote public schools, promoting the different magnet programs and dual enrollment and pre-professional programs and all of the like. But at the same time, they're trying to cut positions, cut teachers, close schools. And the more that they do that, the less people are satisfied. So it just, again, comes down to this kind of like circling the drain moment that at some point, many public schools districts could be at a point where they do get taken over by um, by the state. And there are, just from speaking to superintendents, it's scary, and they have to be prepared for this idea that this pot of money is shrinking for them, and how can they prepare best for that?
Right. In something I know this came up in one or two of the discussions that you've had with education leaders. Um, of course, the districts have feelings about universal vouchers, about the expansion of charter schools, but forcing the districts to be more proactive and almost kind of do a sales job of public schools, like. that may not actually be the worst thing, right? Like
Yeah.
I actually kind of heard that and thought to myself, like maybe they should have been doing this a long time ago.
Yeah, and for parents going to just like one school expo where there are these booths of tons of elementary schools and middle schools and high schools, it's not the best format for a family to figure out what are our best educational options. So for a place like Orange County, where I was speaking to some officials there at their public school district, and they're like, we're trying to hire like former PR people, former journalists, so that we can get ahead of the curve of producing actual content so that people know about who we are as a district, what we stand for, what programs do we have. And yeah, public schools have really had to kind of shift their mindset of like, we can't just do the like expo at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, or do the traditional just like school tours for parents. Like we really have to get creative if we want to keep drawing families into the public school district.
Kate, one thing, I've seen a question or two about David Jolly and Gwen Graham, who are the the Democratic nominees for governor. There's not effectively a primary. Um, and I don't want to get too much into like a David Jolly versus Byron Donalds thing because that's November and we're talking about the primaries. Having said that, David Jolly has made, the kind of defense of public education a part of his pitch, and I think was kind of early on this. And I think speaks for the concern that a lot of educators have and a lot of, you know, public, public school supporters, for lack of a better term, about about the transparency of private schools, about the performance of private and charter schools versus traditional public schools. Um, I don't know, talk a little bit about that. Like, are we headed? I mean, if Byron Donalds is the nominee, it seems to me in some ways this could be another sort of referendum on like education in the state.
Yeah, I think, when we get to that point, absolutely. I mean, this is a huge conversation for families across the state. Public schools are a foundational, institution in our communities. Already in some counties, small and rural areas, there are only a handful of schools for the entire county. So they're already operating on really narrow margins. As far as David Jolly, I will say his kids go to private schools. He uses vouchers to pay for his kids' education as well, which is part of the complexities of this conversation right now. When even the Republican now turned Democrat candidate for governor um, is tapping into the system, and that's part of the broad support that there is. Still, the vast majority of families are choosing a public school of one kind or another. But yeah, I think it goes back to um, it hasn't necessarily resonated in this way in the primary, but Byron Donalds is a school choice champion, as one of his donors put it to us. And that's how he's built his career. And he and his wife Erica Donalds held a campaign event a few months ago where they laid out what that vision would be. Um, because again, jointly, like they are both steeped in this issue. Um, and Erica Donalds, said along the lines of, it's unimaginable what our education system will look like when we fully unleash capitalism and free market ideas and really make this a competitive marketplace. And one of the most striking things that she said was profit will not be a bad word under their education system. And so we can, certainly anticipate, I think, many changes that they would try and push if they get to that point.
This is, I mean, I think education in particular is one of those issues that, um, not for the first time, I wonder if Florida voters could be getting more than they bargained for. And I say that because, and again, Trinity and I have had a lot of discussions about this recently, that when school closures start hitting these different communities, and they are hitting all these different communities across the state, um, what seems to really galvanize these neighborhoods is the realization that there are schools on the chopping block. And I think what's happened in the last year or two is that schools in wealthier neighborhoods that serve majority white students have started getting on the chopping block. And I think that's gotten that has left some of these places really shocked. And I think that there if there is a broader awareness about what's happening in K through 12 education in Florida, I think it's because the scope of sort of how much school choice we have kind of injected into the system is really it's starting to hit everybody now. These are not changes that districts can just hide in lower income neighborhoods or something. This is kind of hitting everybody.
Yeah.
Either one of you can weigh in on that because, like I said, Kate, you reported on this stuff for a long time, and Trinity, you're seeing a lot of that up close too.
Yeah. Well, and just to sort of underscore how significant this is in a state like Florida, which is the third largest state in the country, however many people move here every day, it is striking that we are seeing this wave of school closures because there are children out there. Like, yes, families across the board are having fewer children, they're having children later. Like, that is true. There are these demographic shifts happening. But I just think of, you know, time earlier in my career when I was in the Midwest in the state of Iowa, where the population is stagnant and falling in many places. And you're seeing school consolidation there because there's only 3 million people in the whole state. Like, it's striking that we are also experiencing these similar dynamics that are a result of policy decisions, as opposed to, you know, people, just making their choices about where they're going to live. It's really a lot of this goes back to specific policy decisions.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, talking about policy decisions, um, Republican lawmakers have really decided, at least during last session, to not take up the issue of school vouchers, and not only to not put any guardrails or parameters around it, but also continue to have different organizations that provide these scholarships based off of like the tax credit scholarships, which are a little bit different than FTE scholarships, um, to add more vendors to provide those types of scholarships and to funnel more, at least private dollars, to the system as well. So we're really seeing it just expand at a rate that I don't think is happening anywhere else.
Yeah, and just to underscore what Trinity's saying there, basically the school voucher program, when state lawmakers made it universally available to all children, regardless of family income, it grew so large, so fast. The state was not able to keep up. And state auditors have found there are thousands of kids at any given point that the state cannot reliably say whether they are in private schools or they're in public schools. They're floating somewhere in the ether. And there are millions of dollars attached to those children that are being paid out incorrectly, to the wrong entity. And state lawmakers had the opportunity to delve into that issue and try and fix it. A Republican state senator, Don Gates, who's very respected, a former Senate president, filed a bill that would have tried to get at these issues. It was one of the first bills that the Senate passed during the regular session, and it never had a chance in the House. So lawmakers just left it, and we'll have another year of more growth and more very serious questions about millions of dollars of public funding that is being spent incorrectly, like in violation of state law.
Yeah, and we could, I mean, we could get into this. I mean, this could be the single topic we discussed the entire time,
Yeah, there's so
honestly.
much.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, okay, one thing, this governor's race, if we go forward to November just for a second, this is not 2022. I think everyone expects that this will be more competitive this year. How much, I think, we're going to have to see, but I think people tend to agree that David Jolly, it's not like 1,000,000 to 1 odds. It's something, and he's not a 50-50 proposition either, somewhere in between. Um, Having said that, Florida on a state level has been run by one party for decades. And something I'm curious to get your thoughts on, there are status quo elections and there are change elections. And if you look at Florida as a one party state, what does, I mean, is this, let's say that, Byron Donalds becomes the governor. Let's just play this thought experiment. Is he a status quo candidate or is he a change candidate? Do you see any desire to kind of break from DeSantian conservatism, kind of whatever that means, whether it's stylistically, policy-wise? So yeah, is this a change election or a status quo election?
Hmm. Um, I think I think there is a possibility for both. Way to fudge that answer, but I think, I mean, Byron Donalds has certainly been running on a platform of Governor DeSantis was great. We're like keeping that foundation, we're building on it. So really um, sort of crediting the work that he has done, the policies that he has advanced over the last 8 years and his leadership, and wanting to go from there. So really, yeah, like trying to run in concert. I think as far as you know change, like aspects of a change election that we could see, um, may show up in state legislative races of like, can Democrats break the supermajority in either chamber? We have seen special elections for the state legislature where Democrats in sort of surprise moves were able to win back competitive seats, including a state house district that includes Mar-a-Lago. So Democrats certainly championed, those wins, and are hoping that those are, premonitions of what's to come as far as their, they hope ability to cross over in some of these competitive districts and bring in more independents, more Republicans who are not happy with the direction that the second Trump administration is going. And we know historically, midterm election, like oftentimes, people are not loving how the president's administration is playing out. Like we can expect, just because of those historical patterns, to see Republicans take a hit, um, especially, when President Trump is really backtracking on what many of his supporters thought were some of his core campaign promises of no more forever wars, and really improving the economy. And now, we have $4 a gallon gas. Um, so
Well,
I think it could cut both ways.
something I wonder about and feel like I've seen some hints that this could be the direction things are going. We've spent a lot of this discussion focused on education, I think rightly, but affordability is the sort of, at least what Democrats think is like the soft underbelly of Republican rule, even in red states like Florida. And I think that we have seen, Byron Donalds has an ad talking about no more rate increases for utility companies. Like he seems to have gotten the message that the kind of status quo in Tallahassee isn't working, and that there is a kind of, I don't know, maybe he's, I wonder if like a Byron Donalds governor is slightly more populist than we've seen in a Ron DeSantis, who's very dogmatically, you know, very conservative, like fiscally conservative, doesn't play the kind of populist stuff at all. I don't think affordability plays to his policy interests or his stylistic strengths very much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in one area where we've seen Byron Donalds sort of change course a bit is on data centers and AI. This has been, a huge issue across the country. This really incredible upswelling and grassroots organizing across the political spectrum in rural communities and urban communities. And we have seen um, Byron Donalds, sort of walk back, try and temper some of his previous statements in support of that kind of AI development and infrastructure um, in response to this kind of populist, upswelling that we've been seeing. So it's very interesting to watch that kind of confluence and the unifying aspects of it again across the political spectrum and across different um, you know sort of areas of passion that voters have.
Sure. Well, I think, Deirdre, we have some folks in the queue who want to come into the mix here and ask a question.
Yeah, absolutely. We have many, many folks with amazing questions. There's some great conversation happening in the chat as well. Trinity's taken a few questions about school student achievements. So since we were talking about affordability, I want to bring in somebody who had a question earlier, Isis Alvarez. Isis, I'm going to bring you into the panel for just a moment to ask your question and talk a little bit about this issue that may not be on the ballot until November, but is certainly garnering quite a bit of conversation in, well, in our social media and certainly across the state.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for the chance to be here. And thanks for having this conversation and creating access to this information. Yeah, my question's really around property tax. And obviously for us at the Nonprofit Center, that is really what's occupying a lot of our space and strategy design and really kind of um, keeping us on our toes of what's really going to happen. And so I know kind of looking at the primary specifically, my question was around obviously a lot of the narrative that we're seeing right now is just really focused on cost savings. And for us, the Nonprofit Center, we're really trying to make the case of like what is cloaked as cost savings isn't actually cost savings when you're eliminating a lot of, essential services that actually help working class families. And so I'm curious of any conversation that's happening right now with candidates around the plans for addressing the budget shortfall that would be created. And obviously, these candidates, for the most part, wouldn't be a part of actually addressing those, right? Those would be more local city council level. But like, are they even acknowledging that this budgetary shortfall is going to happen and the actual impact that it would have on local communities?
Yeah, and so again, this is for the constitutional amendment, just to catch folks up. Yeah, the constitutional amendment that'll be on the November ballot to significantly increase the homestead exemption in Florida with significant implications across the board. Yeah, by and large, there are not a lot of plans. The state legislature passed this in a special session called by the governor, and it was really this like lightning push to get this through before state economists were able to like run the numbers on what does this actually cost? What does this actually mean? It is only after they've passed it, in recent weeks that we've been able to get those numbers and really start to see the fullness of what the impact of this could be, which is billions of dollars of revenue lost for local governments. Um, yeah, I mean, local elected officials right now are like already trying to um, prepare for this potential. And I know, some local communities have already put like hiring freezes in place in advance of maybe this coming through. I will say it has been remarkable the lack of campaign in support of this measure. There was effectively no organized campaign for it. The governor, who for about a year was calling for a proposal like this to for lawmakers to pass a proposal like this. He got the legislature to do it. It was his proposal. They did amend it in the process, and after that, the governor has really distanced himself from it. It's like, oh well, they changed it. It's not really my plan anymore, and has said that he won't be campaigning for it. And no state lawmakers that I know of have been standing up to defend it. Whereas we've seen a host of local elected officials, local governments, but also, state associations for firefighters, for first responders, coming forward and saying this is too much, too fast, and we can't take this. So we'll
And
see. We'll
Kate,
see
there's
how
a
it goes.
comment in the chat about what's the status of the lawsuits involving the specific language. Is it possible that this will disqualify it from being on the ballot at all?
Yeah, so there was a hearing this week in Tallahassee, in this lawsuit challenging the language of the ballot, effectively saying that it's unlawful, it's biased, and cannot go before the voters in its current state. So the judge heard those arguments um, from the parties. The state has maintained they have, met their duty, and that it should go before the voters as is. Um, we'll see what the judge says. We are fast approaching deadlines for these ballots to go out, even for the November election. Um, I think it's in September, I believe, when they start going out for overseas voters. So we don't have a lot of time to nail this down. But yeah, at this point, we're waiting for the judge to make a ruling on whether the language is sufficient legally, or if it's not, the next expected step is that the judge would send this to the state attorney general with, specific notes about what he believes is deficient in the language, and then the state attorney general would be able to take a crack at it. And then we go from there.
Which, given the Attorney General James Othmeyer is a stalwart DeSantis ally, an ally to all conservative causes, that I have kind of wondered if that's a careful what you wish for sort of scenario for the plaintiffs in this. I mean, um, it's not inconceivable that he would draw up language that opponents of this ballot measure would find even more objectionable than what's there now.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely a concern for these opponents. I will say, like in this process, if they take issue with the attorney general's language, if it gets to that point, the folks who have filed this lawsuit can bring it on back and challenge that again. And so they're really running against the clock and trying to get language that the courts will accept and say, yes, this is legally viable.
Thank you, Isis, so much for the question. Going to bring another person in to talk a little bit about some of the questions around education. I know we have sounds like we need to have a follow-up event on that. And Rihanna, your question is around and you can clarify it a little bit, but your question is around some of the counties that have millage um, referenda on the ballot in November and how that might play into all this.
Yeah. My question is kind of not necessarily a question, just more awareness of what that 1 mil means. Specifically in Duval County, we had the 1 mil passed in 2022. As Jacksonville had the record number of teacher loss, and so that vote went through, thank God, which was primarily used, to increase teacher salary and hopefully keep some of the teachers in the classroom. And as that vote comes back around, some of you may know there was a huge debate on City Council of whether that should even be on the ballot. So that was a accomplishment, and it's coming around again in November. A lot of teachers comment just on social media alone about how if it wasn't for this referendum, I would not be in the classroom. Like I need that money to survive. And so just bringing back the focus on advocating for that, making sure that we all work hard for that vote to go through so we keep teachers in the classroom. I know Trinity spoke about like teacher loss, lack of teacher retention. Salary plays a huge part because, as Trinity mentioned, Florida is very low the pay scale. My niece is a teacher in Atlanta, and she came to visit Jacksonville. She's like, I would love to move here and be a teacher here. And I'm like, I don't know if that's if that's the truth. She's making like 60K. Of course, the cost of living is a bit different, but it's quite an adjustment just from Florida to Georgia. So I won't say I necessarily had a question. I just wanted to bring that to light.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. Honestly, you probably it might feel like DCPS itself was probably not advocating for it in the way that it probably could. Um, I know that our superintendent is like, we can't really tell people how to vote, but this also is something really, really important to teachers. We've heard a number of anecdotes of, this helps pay for my mortgage, this helps pay for my car payment, this helps me with medical bills or like unexpected expenses. So it really is important for teachers to feel supported and to feel seen. And the superintendent himself has said, if we don't get this through, he expects that many teachers will leave the district for other local districts like St. Johns County, which also is like going through the same deal right now. But also just like leaving the profession completely, too, which is still a great loss to the educational system. I'll also say that this millage not only helps teachers as well, but it also helps to put things like new instruments, new band uniforms, um, arts and craft supplies. So it really does also help the arts as well and sports programs in school, which is just another reason why, voters should vote the right way on this millage. So.
Also, a good reminder that there are things on the ballot once again in August that you can vote on regardless of party affiliation. So, even though we have closed primaries, um, if you're an MPA or whatever, you should still go vote because there are probably things on the ballot that you get to vote for.
Great. Thank you so much, Rihanna. And we will bring up hopefully our next person. Howard, you had a question about campaign finance and a couple of other ones. So wanted to just see if we could bring you into the conversation and get some of your questions in there.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm, as a citizen, not a journalist, I am curious about um, the finances of the candidates. Back under Reuben Askew, we adopted the constitutional amendment called the Sunshine Amendment to require financial disclosure of all candidates for local and state offices to see uh, use it as a barometer to see whether they got wealthy while they were in office or whether they stayed even or where they're getting their support from, who they're employed by, and so forth. And I think in analyzing all the candidates. I think that's vital information to have. And I have found over the years it seems to be harder and harder to get to for average laymen. And I'm wondering if the journalists in the crowd can give us a clue as to how easily to obtain that information.
What a great question, Howard. Thank you so much. So, yes, we can get this information for you. So, as far as candidates, you want to go to the Secretary of State's website, and there are candidate search tools, and you can see, um, that financial disclosure for these candidates. Searching by year of election, what position they're running for, and then see for candidates across the state. Um, and it's great to look at. It's like great practice for journalists, but for private citizens as well. I will also shout out the Florida Commission on Ethics. They have a database for elected officials who are in office. They also have to keep filing those reports every year, at the state legislative level on down. So you can go back and again search by year of the filing, by name of the elected official in that database, and find all of their filings. And it's fascinating stuff. And as you say, to look and compare over previous years as well of, how how's their position changed since they've been in elected office. And those are tools that you don't need to file a public records request to access. That's information that is readily available in these databases that you can go right now and search. So have fun.
What about candidates for federal office?
For federal office, the Federal Elections Commission has their search tools as well. So you can go and search at the FEC.
We put the state link in the chat, and then we can also add the federal one in the chat here, so you can check it out. One of the things that we're thinking about here at the Trib is how we can make this information more accessible and easy to find.
That's important. Thank you very much. I do think, the hope was when that amendment passed was journalists would dig out this information whenever it was relevant or they thought the public needed to know it. And I'm not sure I'm seeing the journalists actually informing us very much about what's going on there, which leads us to conclude, well, everything must be fine. Is everything fine?
Nate,
There's
is
a lot to
everything
look
fine,
at.
Kate?
Yeah, well, and we're hoping to develop a tool to make all of this easier for you to do within our website, to be able to search exactly that, financial disclosures, but also voting records, stances that elected officials have taken over the years. So
Yeah.
stay tuned.
Thank you for the info.
Very top of mind. Also, Kate, I don't know that the phrase shout out to the Florida Commission on Ethics has ever been uttered by somebody
Ah.
before. So very pioneering.
Howard, great questions. Thank you so much for that. And I want to highlight a few other ones that have popped up. Some of the folks are, there were a couple of questions in the registration about mail-in ballots and changes to Florida law that might be affecting them. And I will absolutely share this in the chat in just a moment, but I will say that we have our partners at University of Florida have an awesome website that's showing turnout trends. We'll be embedding those on our site as well. But it is worth noting that mail ballot requests are currently down by more than half this year. And you have until 5 p.m. on August 6th to request a mail ballot. But there's definitely that trend happening. So wondering if one of y'all can tackle what's going on with mail balloting.
That's a Kate question for sure.
Okay. So yeah, it looks like voters need to drop off their mail-in ballots during the early voting period, or at an official drop box if you're not mailing them back. And that's different from past years when voters were able to drive through election offices to return them. So again, dropping off those mail-in ballots during the early voting period or at an official drop box.
There's also the aspect of those mail ballots needing to be received by the close of polls on election day. Some folks may be used to the time when they just needed to be postmarked by that day, and
Hmm.
now they need to actually be received by 7 p.m. on election day, 7 p.m. local time.
Yeah, really important distinction.
Yeah. And then a couple of other notes. I put the voter turnout tool in the chat. But a couple of other things just like really seems to be in line so far with 2022. So nothing surprising there. And it's probably on track to be a turnout in the August primaries of somewhere between 22 and 25%. So that's very much in line with trends that we're seeing in the last midterm election. Couple of other questions that came through either the chat or the registration are kind of there's a lot about education, so it sounds like we need to have another thing to follow up on that, but also some questions around local elections, millage rates, and other things that may be on the November ballot, and how that might affect turnout in the August primary.
I mean, how things on the November ballot affect turnout in the August primary. I mean, look, the reality is that primaries get terrible turnout. And if this, if past is prologue and we don't have any reason to think it won't be, turnout's going to be quite poor. And that's bad because, again, there are things decided in August, including lots and lots of judicial races, school board races. Um, and there can be ballot questions in August. So some of that's going to be highly localized, but it's just kind of an unfortunate dynamic about our state and in our country generally is that we just don't we don't get good turnout in these elections.
One, we make specific policy decisions that erect barriers for voters as well. Other states you can register on election day at your polling place, vote right then. Not the case in the state of Florida. So
I do, there is a question here from Jimmy Orth, who is with the St. John's River Keeper. Shout out, Jimmy. Asking if there are any environmental issues that could have an impact on voter sentiment. I don't, and Kate, you can certainly weigh in on this too. I don't know that there's been anything top of mind recently, but I do wonder when the general election gets underway in earnest, if a lot of the controversy over the past couple of years about public land and protecting public land and state parks becomes an important part of somebody's platform. I'm tempted to think that we will see that. Now, whether, is that going to move an election? Maybe not, but we did see that people sure get really upset when those natural resources are being threatened.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the environment, state lands has really been this incredible, like unifying cross-partisan, cross-county issue these past few years. It's been very interesting to see that outpouring of support that brings together, folks who may not agree on many other political issues. I think for many folks who are opposed to the data centers, it is an environmental issue for them. There are a number of issues that are wrapped up in
Yeah, that's a great point.
the data center debate. But yeah, for some people, it's very much in their interest in protecting Florida's lands and waters.
Yeah. I kind of feel like that speaks a little bit to this idea about whether this is a status quo election or a change election or what we might even see from a Republican candidate to kind of break with DeSantis. Like I would not be surprised if both candidates in this race actually took a very deliberate kind of tack of saying, there won't be golf courses built on state parks when I'm governor. We won't be drilling for oil in the Apalachicola Basin. Like we won't like, I mean, there have been it's actually really striking the number of controversies that have cropped up in the last few years around this issue.
Hmm. And as far as data centers, that could be, a stronger break that we see with President Trump, for Republican candidates. The president has really wanted Congress to be the one to decide issues of, regulating AI. And that's where we've seen some daylight for some of these Florida Republicans, recognizing this upswelling that we're seeing across the state. So that can be interesting to watch, in the president's home state.
We also got a question about immigration and how some of the things that we've seen across the state, whether it be the controversy over alligator Alcatraz or changes in TPS and how that might affect the labor force. Would that play any role in the election, either in August or in November?
Well, not to tie everything back to education, but one of the drivers of decreased enrollment, particularly in South Florida, there is a belief that this really strict, sort of mass immigration crackdown has led to even more student enrollment decline.
Yeah, and I know at least for Miami-Dade, which is the third largest school district in the country, it's, there is the aspect of, families in Miami-Dade being fearful of sending their kids to school and, them being intercepted by ICE. But even more so, it is the thousands of children around the world who would, in a typical year, come to Miami-Dade County, come to Florida, to move and enroll their children here, who are not coming. Where in previous years, it was like 20,000 new students a year were enrolling in Miami-Dade, and those kids are just not coming. So.
All right, I threw a couple of recent stories about that in the chat. Had some great reporting from Kate as well as from one of our summer fellows, Zoe. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned those. We have many more questions than we could possibly get to. We had some amazing questions about homeschooling. I know that's something that Trinity's been doing some research on, and quite a lot more to come on environmental issues. So feel free to keep flowing your questions in here. We're going to add them to the FAQ on the website. Um, but I just want to give everybody kind of a 60-second closeout to talk a little bit about what you're going to be looking for in the next couple of weeks before the primary, and then what you're going to be looking for between August 18th and November 3rd. So Trinity, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Kate, and we'll finish with Nate.
Yeah, so school board races are nonpartisan in nature, but of course, people vote the way that they want to in their personal lives. So I'm definitely tracking the kind of political leaning of school boards as those elections come through in the primary and in November. So those are pretty important to me, and as well as just like following up on Moms for Liberty and seeing where their kind of influence lands by November.
Yeah, I am really going to be following the property tax proposal, um, which again can have just tremendous impacts across the state, um, not just for individual, local governments' abilities to fund their priorities, but really, for the flow of power across the state of Florida, potentially for years to come. So yeah, really looking out for some rulings on where that language stands, and to see, how that campaign shakes out as far as, the different groups and advocates who are coming out against it. And if we do see some sort of coalition, coming together to defend this for voters.
Yeah, and we have because of our great staff and people like Kate and Trinity, we have some great stories coming that touch on campaign finance, that touch on affordability, which we've talked about a good deal here tonight. Um, we have stories looking at our some of the most powerful officials in the state right now have not actually ever been elected to those positions. So we have a story about our appointed U.S. Senator and Attorney General and our Chief Financial Officer, in the sort of aggressive use of their powers. Um, so yeah, we have some good stuff coming, and like Kate and Deirdre mentioned, in the this kind of medium term, we have a lot of plans to bring, I think, a lot of good information, campaign finance being one of them, voting records, to voters in a more direct and very accessible way. And that's something that I think is like the most exciting thing if we can pull it off, and I think we will. So stay tuned for that.
All right. Thank you all so much. Give like a virtual round of applause to our amazing panelists and as well as all of you who are willing to jump into the panel. So I'm going to take us home. A lot more to come between now and August 18th. Shout out to Steve for asking how we can get this information in front of more people. So that is a question that we think about and maybe obsess over every single day, and we need your help. So this is where everybody on this call, all of you can make a huge difference by sharing this information with people that you know. Um, we also could not do this without financial support. So I know I see many of our supporters here. If you have the ability, any amount, monthly donation makes a huge difference to our team and allows us to stay super independent, allows us to stay really aggressive on some of this reporting, and also allows us to try to get it in front of more people. Um, we have a bunch of events planned for the fall before the November elections. And so like every single thing that you can do, whether you're an ambassador for this work, whether you're reading and sharing local news, forwarding emails to people that you know, encouraging them to become informed and to vote, that all makes a huge difference. So thank you all so much for being a part of this. We look forward to hearing from you. Keep all of the tips, all of the ideas, all of the requests coming, because that's how we can provide you with the best information ahead of the elections. And thank you all for coming out tonight. We look forward to seeing you online and in person over the next few months.